Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for tuning in. We're really happy to have you here today. For those of you I don't know, my name is Chidi Perales, and I'm the Vice President for Museum Exhibitions, Learning, and Engagement here at Selby Gardens. And I'm here with two of my colleagues, Elizabeth Gandy, can you wave? Who is our curatorial assistant and a Florida native plants specialist who works here in the botany department at Selby Gardens, and Dr. Sally Chambers, a research botanist at the gardens here. So today's program is going to be a slideshow with videos peppered with pauses in that for discussion. We'll have some time for Q&A. For those of you who haven't used a Zoom webinar before, you can both see and hear us, but we can't see and hear you. So we're going to ask you to use the chat feature to interact with us. Okay, so actually let's get started with that. If anyone's tuning in from out of town, we always like to know where people are tuning in from. So if you could use that chat feature and let us know where you're coming from, that would be really great. It's always fun to see. While we're waiting to hear where you're coming in from, I just want to let you know what today's format is going to be. So we'll go back and forth. We'll have some videos, both interviews with Sally and Liz, and some time to discuss and ask questions and that kind of thing. It's really great to have Sally and Liz here. They love to share what they do. They're very passionate about it, and they're very inspired to nurture the next generation of scientists. I think probably a lot of you know who are tuning in that women in science are greatly underrepresented. And so this year's exhibition was an opportunity for us to showcase the female contributions to our collections and to the building of this garden. Okay, I'm going to read where some people are coming in from. We've got people coming in from San Antonio, Texas, Bar Harbor, Maine, Venice, Florida, not Italy. Thank you for clarifying. Bradenton, Sarasota, across the street from Selby, Clifton Park, New York, Seymour, Indiana. And it's just so fun to be able to reach people who are all over the country and sometimes international, even though we know that's Venice, Florida, not Italy. So keep writing in. We love to see where you're coming from. Okay, so as many of you may know, each year we open an orchid show, which we theme differently each year so that we can have kind of a unique interpretation each year that we bring you back so that we can showcase our orchid collections. And so this year's show is no exception. And I'm going to show you, this is our title panel, the 45th Anniversary Orchid Show, Women Breaking the Glasshouse Ceiling. So I just want to start off our program by sharing with you the key concepts of this year's exhibition. So of course, first and foremost, it's to showcase our world-class collection of orchids, both living and preserved. We always start with that. So each year you're going to see that. This year, we also have 3 other celebrations. And so we decided to make this really a floral anniversary celebration. The first anniversary, as you can tell, is our 45th anniversary of being open to the public. So we opened in 1975, and we think that that's something to celebrate. So we decided to kind of craft the key concepts around that anniversary celebration. Then we realized that this was the centennial anniversary of when Bill and Marie Selby purchased this beautiful property. And so they bought this property in 1920 to build their dream home. And so we thought, well, that's a really important anniversary too. What a great decision they made. What a wonderful location. And then as we started to think about it, that time period, 1920, was the ratification of the 19th Amendment to the US Constitution, which of course guaranteed women the right to vote. And we thought, this is an election year, it's really important. We think about our right to vote, the right to exercise all of our rights. And where would we be in the field of science and botanical research? Where would women be if we didn't have that very basic right to vote and make our voices heard? So we thought all of these things could sort of be rolled into this beautiful kind of floral celebration And by doing that, we could elevate our female founder, Mrs. Selby, and then look at the female contributions to Selby Gardens collections. And so that's why we decided to feature two of my female colleagues here, Liz and Sally, as well as a number of other women that you're going to learn about in the upcoming slides. So that all being said, the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to show you two video clips. One is just a little 1-minute video that showcases, it's like a walking tour of the exhibition, beginning in the conservatory and winding up in the museum. So those of you who are, oh, I see Newtown, Connecticut as well. Those of you who are far away and haven't been able to come and see the show, or those of you who are at home and are staying home, you know, for safety reasons, then you get to see the show in this way. The next video is a 2-minute clip from our fearless leader, Jennifer Romanecki, a president and CEO, who's going to share with us some welcoming remarks and some acknowledgments about who helped make the Orchid Show possible. So after we see those two videos, we'll get started with the videos and interviews with Liz and Sally. Isn't that fun? Such a celebratory video.
Hello, I'm Jennifer Romanecki, President and CEO of Marie Selby Botanical Gardens, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to the 45th Anniversary Orchid Show, Women Breaking the Glasshouse Ceiling. This year marks the 45th anniversary of the official opening of Marie Selby Botanical Gardens' downtown Sarasota campus. To celebrate, the annual Orchid Show will honor the founder, Marie Selby, and highlight the accomplishments of the many notable women who have built on her legacy and helped to make Selby Gardens home to the best scientifically documented collection of orchids in the world. The Orchid Show will combine a spectacular display of living orchids in the Tropical Conservatory with an impressive exhibition of orchid treasures from Selby Gardens Library and preserved collections in the Museum of Botany and the Arts. To these will be added a stunning display of orchids and roses at the Selby House, marking the 100th anniversary of William and Marie Selby's purchase of the property in Sarasota on which Selby Gardens' downtown campus now stands. We are deeply appreciative of our presenting sponsor, Better Grow. I also want to thank our major sponsors, the State of Florida, Department of State, Division of Cultural Affairs, and the Florida Council on Arts and Culture, Gold Coast Eagle Distributing, Sarasota County Tourist Development Tax Revenue, and Williams Parker Harrison Dietz and Getson, as well as supporting sponsors, Travis and Kathy Brown, Jean Widener Goldstein, Terry A. Hansen, Marcy and Michael Klein, Catherine and Frank Martucci, Cornelia and J. Richard Matson, Doctors Joel Morganroth and Gail Morrison Morganroth, and Pauline L. Wamsler. Thank you for all you do to make the Orchid Show possible again this year. Thank you.
So as you can see, it really takes a village to put these exhibitions together. We really work for about a year pulling the Orchid Show together each year. So we're already thinking about next year's show. But in the meantime, let's explore the Museum of Botany and the Arts, which is where our features of Sally and Liz are held. And this is where we celebrate our preserved and library collections. So the first object that I want to show you is a set of books, 2 volumes entitled Ladies' Botany. And you might think, well, what would be different about botany for ladies and botany for men, which was the question I had when I looked at this spine. And I think what's really fascinating is to think about the time period. So this was first published in 1834 by John Lindley, who was, a scientific botanist. At the time, he was really working to professionalize the field of botany. It was not as highly regarded as some of the other fields of science at the time. And of course, like every other field of science, women were not really permitted to participate in the publishing and the research and get credit for the work that they did, though a lot of women did the botanical illustrations, which is what we're going to look at in a moment. But what's interesting about this book is John Lindley, even though he said some things that today sound a little chauvinistic, was actually really a huge proponent of professionalizing the field and kind of getting rid of some of the gender barriers that existed. And as a result, botanical illustration became the first kind of acceptable entree point into the field of botanical research for women. So this book, as you read it, and it's 2 volumes, so he clearly had a lot to say, but within it, he conceives of women having a role in the process of this professionalization of the field, that of mother, fostering in her children a basic understanding and appreciation of plants. So this is reflected in the format of the book, consisting of a series of letters to a mother who wants to educate her children about the natural world. And to this is added illustrations by Sarah Ann Drake, which we'll get to in just a moment. So this is a picture of the North Gallery at the Museum of Botany and the Arts. And this is where we have some very beautiful examples of botanical illustrations from books, oftentimes cut out of books and now framed as works of art in and of themselves. In the center here, I think you can see my cursor, you see this very large book. And this is really one of the great treasures of our library here at Selby Gardens. It is the largest book ever created on orchids, and it's a real look at me showpiece. And it is illustrated by Augusta Withers. It's a book by James Bateman on the Orchidaceae of Mexico and Guatemala, and it's really a showstopper. Right here, you can see a cartoon that circulated at the time that this was published in the early 1800s, joking about the size and weight of the book. So I thought that was very clever. The rest of the gallery, you can see prints over here, some books over here, and here you see some very large format illustrations, which we're going to get to in just a moment. So we're featuring the work of 5 Victorian botanical illustrators. Matilda Smith and Sarah Ann Drake are 2 of those. The others are Charlotte Caroline Sowerby, known as C.C. Sowerby, and Harriet Ann Thistleton Dyer. And all these women led very kind of interesting and unconventional lives during this Victorian period. These are 2 of the beautiful illustrations that we're showcasing, and these come from a complete set of Curtis's Botanical Magazine. And I say that because this is really impressive and important. It's another treasure of our collection. We have a complete set dating back to 1787 all the way up to 2019. So that's a pretty awesome thing to have in our collection. And as you can see, there's absolutely beautiful illustrations within. This is the work of a contemporary botanical illustrator, Olivia Marie Breda, who's local here in Sarasota and happens to be the director of our Academy of Botanical Art. And Olivia is just an incredibly talented artist. You can see these 2 large pieces here that we're featuring. And in the front is a case full of her tools. This piece right here, which is a Fayus entitled Prayer, Olivia completed for this exhibition. It took her over 400 hours to paint it. So if you can imagine the sort of painstaking detail that goes into this botanical illustration as a work of art and as a scientific document. And now this brings us to the South Gallery, which is where we're featuring Sally and Liz among 3 other contemporary botanical explorers. So here we've got on the left-hand side a picture of the wall, which has some interpretive panels with extracts from the interviews that you're going to hear today and some other questions that we asked them, alongside specimens that they selected to include in the exhibition to kind of showcase the work that they do. This is Sally, this is Liz, and in the center here is Libby Bessie, and I'll get to her in just a moment. She's a very important person in the early formative years of the gardens as far as botanical illustration goes. On the left is Piedad Dodson, and on the right in the center is Jane Lure. So Piedad and Jane were the wives of 2 of Selby's earliest founders. Dr. Callaway Dodson was the garden's first director, and he was also an orchidologist. And Dr. Lure was first and foremost Mrs. Selby's surgeon, and then was a part of those early years of the gardens, and really we can pretty much credit him for making sure that this became a garden. Now both Piedad and Jane lost their husbands in this last year, which was awfully sad for all of us. But we wanted to make sure to credit them in the work that they did. Both of these women accompanied their husbands on countless expeditions. And in particular, in those early years, the 70s and 80s, they were exploring Ecuador and Peru. And because there's so much orchid diversity in both of those countries, and many of the places that they went were extremely hard to reach, very difficult conditions, and they both braved these journeys, very, very well. And this is Libby Bessie, who, as I mentioned her before, is featured in this room as well. Libby was one of the early botanical explorers in the 70s and 80s and really helped build the collections. Not only did Libby help fund many of the botanical expeditions, but she went on them. And she went on some really, I would say, hardcore expeditions where she was backpacking, hiking, camping, and sleeping for 3 weeks in the Peruvian Andes and so on and so forth. I should also mention that all of these 3 women are still here with us, residing in Sarasota and part of the fabric of Selby Gardens. So we're just extremely fortunate to have them be a part of our family. This is a very famous orchid that was discovered by Libby Bessie in Peru in 1981. It's called Phragmipedium bessii, and it's a beautiful, obviously beautiful and very striking red orchid, which is terrestrial and kind of small, but very unusual and very, very beautiful. And it really put Selby Gardens on the map in the early 80s as being a serious center for botanical research and calling attention to the wild collected, the field work that our early founders were doing to collect this this plant community. Essentially when you walk through Selby Gardens, more than half of the plants that you see are wild collected. You can't go and buy them at a nursery or anywhere else. And so that's one of the things that makes our collection so very special. And here on the left is Bruce Holst, our VP for botany, and a 26-year veteran of Selby Gardens, I want to say, along with Liz Gandy. And what they're doing here is we're working together to select the specimens that we're going to showcase in this year's orchid show. And you can see Liz there on the right. She's looking at a plant that she collected and she's thinking about it. Does this represent something? Does this represent me in a way that I want to be represented? Does this particular plant or trip kind of help tell my story? And here they are in the field together, giving the thumbs up, obviously having a great time. And these people, all of the scientists that I work with, and I can especially say that about Sally and Liz, just really love what they do. And I think that's super evident. So I'm looking forward to sharing their voices with you in a short moment here. So we sat down with them to ask them a few critical questions, or questions we thought were important. Questions about what has been your journey to a botanical career? What does your average field day look like? What's your best memory from the field? They both agreed they couldn't agree on one. How is botany changing in the digital age? They both use a lot of really interesting high-tech tools. And Sally does a lot of molecular work with tools that most of us have never heard of. And how can we inspire and encourage more young women to get involved in botany? So those are the questions that we sat down to talk about. And we're going to start with this interview with Sally. And each one of these video clips is about 1 or 2 minutes, just so you know what we're watching.
I grew up in rural Kentucky, and I was surrounded by woods and nature, and I played outside all the time. After going to college, I knew that I wanted to work in the environment because I was passionate about being outside. I'm also an avid runner, so running on the trails and nature was really exciting to me. And I thought I wanted to go into environmental law, and I decided that would not be a good fit for me. I'd probably be a little too passionate in the courtroom. And I took a plant identification class where I learned how to study trees and identify trees, and I was hooked after that. So I took all the plant classes I could, and I settled on ferns because I felt like we weren't learning a lot about them, but they were really diverse in the area that I was growing in, or working in, rather. Well, I think that in my classes, I felt like we basically just kind of skipped over them. So I learned about trees, I learned about all these flowering plants, but, you know, I saw all this fern diversity growing around us, and I thought, why are we not learning about this? They seem to be big components of the ecosystem. And they reproduce differently, and they're really old. They're a lineage that have been around for a long time, since the dinosaurs, basically. So they're doing something right, and I wanted to learn a little bit more about their adaptive potential and their evolutionary history.
Great. So we asked Liz kind of the same question. How did you get started in this field?
My journey to a botanical career has been a winding path. When I was young, my parents were great about making me be outdoors, but not necessarily in natural or wild areas. So I spent a lot of time dirty and playing with bugs and chasing things around, and that definitely influenced my love of the outdoors. When I first went to university, I thought I would study animals. I was all about animals. I worked at a veterinarian office. I was a veterinary technician, which I loved. I loved working with them. But I was heavily influenced by a friend and colleague that was a collector of succulent plants. And as I visited her home and visited her collections, I was just so intrigued by the various forms and the life histories, and how some would use smelly flowers to attract flies instead of bees. I loved that. And I just became so intrigued and began to collect myself. And so I think I kind of had a horticultural pathway into the study of plants. And so I took my first botany class when I was in junior college, and my teacher was amazing. He was this fun hippie guy, and he made it fun, and I found that I was so curious about the way that plants, the way that they were able to sustain life on Earth. These seemingly such simple organisms, they're the basis for everything that we are. And I was just blown away by that and wanted to know more. And so as I progressed in university, I said, plants are for me. And so I was not quite sure at the beginning whether or not I wanted to take a field botanical route or a molecular botanical route. I worked in both areas when I was in college, but I ended up just really going towards that field. I loved the exploration aspect of it, and so that became my emphasis.
Okay, great. So we have a little time built in for any Q&A or comments that you might have. So if you want to use the chat feature to do that, feel free to do so. These are early pictures. These are pictures of the two of them kind of early on in their careers. Liz is in the on the left-hand side, and Liz, are you in the Fakahatchee? Where are you there?
No, I was in Big Cypress Preserve in South Florida.
Beautiful.
That was an early field trip with Selby Gardens, actually, when I was a volunteer. And we were on a hunt for a plant that had not been seen in a very long time called Brassica caudata, an orchid.
Did you find it?
No, but we had fun looking.
It's Sally, where are you here? It looks like some sort of a cave.
Yes, so that's this is a picture from my graduate research when I was a PhD student at Purdue University, and I'm collecting a tiny fern in these rock crevices. So this fern is super weird. I call it the Peter Pan fern because it never really fully grows up, doesn't really complete its life cycle. And it's found in these really unique habitats, these sandstone rock shelters that are scattered throughout the Appalachian Mountain Range. And another cool thing about this fern is that it's actually a very close relative of tropical ferns. So that was kind of like my shoe-in to the, foot in the door for getting into tropical research there.
Great. We're getting some questions from our participants. So let's start with Sally, this one's for you. Can you recommend a good book on ferns and orchids in Florida?
So for ferns in particular, I would recommend Gil Nelson's book. I think that one's a really nice one for kind of, amateur botanists. That's the one that I suggest. I actually was just looking at it on my bookshelf. It's just called The Ferns of Florida. For orchids, I'm not totally sure. Liz might have a better idea on that.
Yes, there are quite a few books that are on orchids of Florida, and if it's okay, I can maybe type some of those into the chat as we go along. I know Jeannie was speaking earlier about Dr. Carl Luer, and he does have a really nice publication of orchids of Florida, and then there are also some more recent publications as well. So if I can type those in, would be helpful, and I'll try to get authors and titles on there too.
Thanks, Liz. So we're getting a question from Karen Olson. I think this is to you, Liz. Did you ever find that orchid that you were looking for?
No. Nope, not yet.
Still looking, huh? This is from Lynetta Gaines. Hi, Lynetta. She wants to know, what was the most challenging search that you ever conducted? Maybe that one. You still haven't found that orchid.
That was definitely a challenging search. It was, like I said, it was fun. That's a great question as far as challenge goes, because that can be obstacles in your way, but it can also be sometimes difficult or cryptic plants to find, which Sally could probably speak to based on her work in Appalachia.
Yes, I really like the tiny little plants that are hard to find. I feel like I'm searching for gold. And so then when you do find them, it gets really exciting. But I think a story that kind of comes to mind was actually one of my first international trips here at Selby. And I was with Bruce Holst, and we were down in Belize, and we really wanted to go and find this tiny little fern. I mean, it's like this big when it's an adult, so super tiny. And we drove like all over the place. We looked up historical occurrence records of this little guy. I think he's only seen it in the field like once in his life or something. So it's very small, very cryptic, hard to find. And we also could not find that. Unfortunately, a lot of the area where that historical record had come from had been converted into citrus groves. So loss of habitat is a common theme in the botanical field, unfortunately.
So we're getting a lot of really great questions, which is wonderful, but some of them I happen to know we're going to cover in upcoming clips. So I'm going to move us forward to the next couple of video clips, and then we'll have some more time for Q&A. Here we go. So this is a discussion on field work.
So my average field day definitely varies on the objective and what I'm trying to do. With some of the local work that I've been doing with the cacti that's endangered, Hericea aboriginum, and Tillandsia utriculata, an endangered epiphytic bromeliad, giant air plant. Usually we're going out and trying to scout for those specific populations. So sometimes we really want to go to different areas to make sure that we get different genotypes and just try to span the broad range across Florida as much as possible. For other projects, specifically international ones, it really depends on the objective that I'm trying to address. So some of my research in Dominica was focused on elevational gradients. So I wanted to make sure that I was sampling plants across these different elevational gradients. I wasn't going out for particular taxa in that case. For some of the research I've done with Bruce Holst, in charge of botany, we're just kind of going out and trying to survey different areas. So trying to get just a general sense of the plants that are in some of these remote areas. So a typical field day, that also depends. So generally, we try to be out as much as possible. So you're utilizing as much daylight as you have access to. So you want to get up early, get a good breakfast, drink your coffee, and then go into the field. And usually you're bringing, a backpack, binoculars if you're doing epiphytic stuff. For me, I will bring silica and little baggies so I can collect tissue for genetic analyses later on in the lab. We usually bring GPS so that we can, make a point, put a GPS point and get that information of where we collected that plant. Sharpie is really important so you can document everything. Write in the Rain notebook is really important so you can make sure that you take detailed notes about the plants that you collect and the environment that they're in. What else do we bring? Pruners, gloves, long sleeve everything, anything to make sure you're protected. Those are usually the general tools of the trade, I would say.
Great. Thanks, Sally. So we're going to hear Liz talking about her experience.
Oh, there is no
in
such
fieldwork.
thing as an average field day. I have to be honest. But I can tell you that there are things that field days have in common. One of the most important, I feel like, is planning. In order for a field day to be successful, and that's something that maybe a lot of people don't necessarily understand because you sort of see that end product. You see the photos of people in the field and the collections that come out of it. But before any of that happens, the planning that goes in, where are you going to go? What are your goals? Are you looking at ecological effects? Are you looking to collect? Do you want to see what plants are there? What are their distributions? What are your goals for that? Who will be going? If you're on an international expedition, who are your partners in the host country? That's very important. What sort of permissions are needed? Do you have funding? Where is that funding going to come from? The logistics, especially internationally, are just tremendous. So it can take weeks to set up something maybe locally. If we're on a field trip here in Florida, it can actually go pretty quick. If you're talking about an international expedition, it can be years of planning. And you don't want to be out in the middle of nowhere where you've hiked for days up some mountain and forgot something, right? It's not where you want to be. So you have to make sure that all of your gear is in good working order. And it's a lot of detailed planning. Another thing that they have in common, of course, is sweat. Most of our trips are spent obviously in Central or South America. There's a lot of sweating. Sometimes we are in cooler seasons or cooler habitats, but just lots of effort, lots of physical effort, mental effort, long hours. You're there to do the job, and you're there as long as it takes to get your collections organized and pressed and properly taken care of. Taking a plant from the wild and collecting it is just putting it into a bag and taking a picture of it. That's the easy part. The processing and all of that is what can definitely take some time. Another thing that they have in common is camaraderie. You develop a true camaraderie with the people that you share your field time with, and anyone who has spent time exploring in the field can attest to that, I think. When you spend that time together, not only are you going through trials and tribulations together because you have this sort of discomfort in common, but you get to know each other, and it's really wonderful because you can learn from each other. It's not unusual to be in the field with people with different areas of expertise. And so you can share your knowledge with each other, and it's really enriches the experience. And then another thing I feel strongly about is love. You have to love what you're doing. You love the outdoors. You love that sense of exploration. You love the idea of what is beyond that next tree trunk, what is in the next tree canopy. That I think you really have to feel that, and even if you don't necessarily feel it at first, I think after a while you really do. And I think the people that do botanical exploration and field work, they really do love it. You have to.
That's so great. I feel like we could do an entire program on field work because there's always just so much to say. So if people have questions about that, go ahead and type them in. There's a couple of questions here that, like I said, I think we're going to get to going forward. But Ann Madden has a question here. She said, if either of you could pinpoint one key component to helping the next generation of females go into science, botany, research, et cetera, what would it be?
I think we're gonna get to that, right, as we go along.
Yeah, we do have a section on the next generation. It's a little bit of a different question than what we were going to be answering. So maybe both of you think on that and noodle on that. What could you pinpoint one key component? I mean, Anne, I actually asked Sally and Liz that the other day, something a little different, something more along the lines of what would you study in undergrad to go into botany as a profession? Sally, you want to answer that?
Sure, yeah. So I would say, oftentimes, at least in large university settings, which is, where I came from, and, usually those are the universities where you go and get these advanced degrees and things. The general biology program at those universities, they're often geared towards medical professions. So it would be common for a requirement to be, to take human anatomy and physiology and that kind of stuff. So my undergraduate degree is actually in natural resource and conservation management, which they've changed the name to environmental studies. So I thought that was a really great program because I really got a broad kind of experience. So I took a class on environmental policy and environmental economics and environmental law, but I was able to kind of shape my specialization a little bit that way. And so that's how I got to take all these plant classes. So I would suggest, an environmental science, environmental studies kind of major, and to, just take as many plant classes as you can. Another kind of funny thing is that I never took genetics as an undergrad. I was like, I don't want to be in the lab. I don't want to do any of that. I want to be an ecologist in the field. And then, when I started to work on my degree and I realized, oh man, there's all these really cool questions that you can answer with genetic tools, then that's when I kind of got hooked. So keep an open mind, I would suggest. Yeah.
And I think something that you both said in the first clips was about spending time outside as children and how important it was for probably your parents to be supportive of that and believe in that. So I just want to throw that in there too. Getting another question here. Why did you choose Selby Gardens as a place to work?
Well, I can speak to that. When I first moved to Sarasota in 2004, Selby Gardens was the first place I came. I was a full-time volunteer, 8 hours a day. I spent 4 hours in the morning in the greenhouse working as a horticulture assistant, and 4 hours in the afternoon working with Bruce in the research department. And I fell in love with Selby and have always been associated with Selby in some way, whether as a volunteer until I came to work here in 2005. And I believe very much in the mission of what Selby does. And I'm really proud to be a part of that and to help move that mission forward. And so I feel like we're of a great size where you can really feel like you're part of something big and really making a difference.
I reiterate what Liz said, except I don't have the exact same history. So I became aware of Selby because as I mentioned earlier, I'm originally from Kentucky, but I did a postdoc, so postdoctoral researcher position for about 3 years at the University of Florida. And that's how I came to learn about Selby. And I thought, man, this is a really cool institution. They're small, they're located in a great place, but they still do all of this amazing research. And they specialize in epiphytes. And hey, ferns are really, a key component of the epiphytic community. So maybe I can continue my fern research at Selby Gardens. And I got very lucky and that I, can do that and also expand my horizons as a scientist and work in other systems and, really feel like, like what Liz says, you're making a difference. And especially when it comes to conservation, local conservation efforts.
Yeah. I would definitely reiterate the local part too. Even though we do specialize in epiphytes, we do have a lot of work that we do here locally in Florida. So I'm definitely proud to be a part of that local conservation effort for sure.
Great, thank you both. So I want to just kind of I want to ask people if they understand what this is, this very abstracted image of these spacemen in the rainforest.
That would be my head. This was an
This
expedition.
is your head?
Yes, that would be an expedition in Belize where we had a base camp at the bottom of a mountain. And in order to explore the top of the mountain, we discovered that we needed to sleep at the top of the mountain. And I learned a valuable lesson on that trip that when Bruce Hulse tells you you're going to be spending one night, you should plan for 4. And so we foolishly did not take our hammocks and things like that that we were sleeping in. And we ended up sleeping on the ground. And we were cold and we were wet. And so we were using emergency blankets there. But that's just a great example of how, and that's my backpack, by the way, that I'm sleeping on. My head is on. So that's a great example of how you have to adapt to your situation when you're in the fields, when you're far away. And it was a phenomenal trip. It was wonderful. I would not trade 1 second of it. But yeah, that was definitely a challenge.
It looks very uncomfortable, Sally.
It was very cozy. It was like a little dip in the path.
And Sally, this looks like you and Bruce here.
Yes. Yeah, so we're pressing some ferns that we had collected. This is also a picture from Belize. So at this particular location, we were at a field station, so we actually had beds and showers. But later on in this trip, you know, we were slinging hammocks, and that's definitely not uncommon to be sleeping in a hammock, and a mosquito net around your hammock is pretty critical in the tropics. So
great. All right, well, I think this is all a good segue into the next set of clips, which is about field memories. So we'll do a couple here.
So I have a lot of memories from the field. Anytime you go into the field, you come back with really good stories. And so sometimes those stories are funny about things that happen to you in the field. You know, you think you can be prepared as possible when you go into the field, but there's always going to be something that happens that you're not prepared for. Whether your truck gets hung up somewhere in the mud and you have to run to get help, that's happened a few times. Things like that. But usually, you know, every field experience is different, and some places are just really magical. And so that to me is what I take back from my field experiences. It's just getting to experience these different remote communities where a lot of people don't go to, and it's just a really magical experience. And I think that's the best way that I can kind of summarize that feeling.
Oh my gosh, I have so many wonderful field memories. One, I can tell you that from the perspective of a woman in the field, one of the things that can be challenging is being pregnant while doing field work. And I did have just kind of a funny incident when I was pregnant with my son. I was probably about 7 months pregnant, and on a field trip with a colleague at the time, and we were doing a lot of hiking through thick palmettos, which, as you know, can be difficult to walk through. And so you're wearing long, thick pants, heavy boots, and it's kind of hard to find those things in pregnancy size. So that can be challenging sometimes to find appropriate field gear as a pregnant woman. But I remember as we finished our walk through the palmettos and came up on a trail, my boots were untied. They had come undone, and I was so hot, and I was so sweaty, and I was so pregnant, and my clothes were just clinging to me as they do, and I could not bend over and tie my shoes. I could not. So my colleague, wonderful as she was, helped me. Unquestioningly helped me. But that was just kind of one of those reminders of how, as you try to integrate family and work, how those challenges just kind of pop up.
That's great. So again, if anybody has questions about field work, feel free to write them in here. The picture here on the left is Liz and Bruce. Right, Liz?
Yes. Yeah, also in Belize, yes. That was a process of sorting collections for shipment back to the United States.
Mm-hmm. And the picture on the right, Sally, can you tell us a little bit about this? It's a very interesting picture.
Yes, I love that picture. So that's got a funny story to kind of go along with it. So this was actually one of the places where we were sleeping in our hammocks. So this is an old, well, I guess it's still used, but an army site in Belize. And so it's used by the British military, and pretty run down and ragged, you can tell. So a little creepy to be working there. But turns out that, we were creeping other people out apparently. So this is kind of a field site it's pretty remote, and you drive down all these like mud and gravel roads, and you need a four-wheel drive vehicle anytime you do field work, just so everybody knows. If you don't, that's when you get stuck and when you have to run and get help. So we're driving and we get to the site, and we pass a couple radio stations, just radio towers and stuff along the way, and we sleep there that night. And we were making dinner at night with our headlamps, and it probably had processed some plants as well as that point. And the next day we go into the field, and so we come back and kind of do the whole thing over again. And then all of a sudden these two guys show up with big guns and in all of their military regalia, and we were like, oh, hey. And they were like, what are you guys doing here? And we were like, oh, we're camping. And, we had all of our permits and everything to show them. But it turns out that they were just curious. They were like, why are there lights on? Like, they were just checking on us because we were more of a security concern at that point. And, we're like, oh, we're just lowly botanists. But these two guys were very interested in the work that we were doing. They were interested in the fact that I was a female doctor. And in this picture I'm giving them, it's kind of hard to tell, but I'm holding up a little fern. So I was giving them a little impromptu botany lesson on ferns and fern identification. So that's the story behind that photo.
That's great. I'm glad somebody captured it on film. We're getting a question from Sharon Seeger asking, how long are you gone on a field trip?
Depends on the trip.
Yeah.
Could be an hour or it could be weeks.
Right. Yeah, it really does. For some of the local conservation stuff, it's, like half a day or a day trip, depending on the objective. And international trips, I've been gone for as long as 5 weeks. So it really ranges. But anything international, I feel like you at least want a couple weeks out of it to really try to get as much work done as you can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you're going to travel to another country, you want to spend the time. But we spend a night in the woods every chance we get, for sure.
Yep.
We got another comment here from Joanne Hine, and this was when we were discussing how to get where you are, how to get to this, to a career in botany. So she said New York Botanical Gardens offers many classes. They're not degree granting as far as I know, but they have many certificate programs, and that's true. New York Botanical does. We offer quite a few classes as well that are not certificate, that are not degree seeking, but there are definitely lots of gardens across the country that have really interesting training programs. So
I would also like to chime in on that a little bit as well, in the sense that a lot of larger botanical institutions, botanical gardens, are affiliated with a university. Mm-hmm. So I actually have a lot of colleagues that have gone through and gotten PhDs and such from the New York Botanical Garden. Mm-hmm. I believe that their degree is, technically from SUNY, one of the SUNY systems, but that's not uncommon for, a lot of the botanical researchers at botanical gardens to, mm-hmm. Mentor and advise students in that sense. And just to plug Selby a little bit, we work a lot with the New College of Florida students here. So we're definitely active in those kinds of mentoring roles as well.
Yeah, that's great. And I know Sally's going to talk about that a little bit in one of the upcoming clips. And we actually have a formal agreement with New College where their students can get credit for doing their internships with us, which is really wonderful. So this next bit is about inspiring the next generation. So we're going to hear from Sally. There's a little lag time in the beginning, but it's coming.
Another thing that I'm really passionate about is promoting equality and diversity in STEM in general. And being a young female in science, I've been impacted by that myself. I think being a representative is one big thing. Just seeing somebody like you in a position, that you want to be in, kind of gives you a sense of like, oh wait, I can do that too. So in my career, I've had female mentors that have been really important and integral into my success, and they've, served as benchmarks for me to say, I can do that. It's also helpful because they understand things that are a little bit different for women than for men. And I think, in general, just having allies in your court. I worked with a male scientist when I was an undergraduate student. My first experience into science. And he was, you know, really engaging, and he really promoted me and encouraged me as a scientist. And so I really appreciated that, and he's definitely been a very strong mentor for me in the past. So I think just being a representative and being a strong ally, and you know, encouraging people, because, you know, sometimes we need that. So for young women that want to be involved in botany, I would definitely say to get as much research experience as you can. Get involved, you know, volunteer, apply for those internships, apply for those grants. I specifically have worked with a number of students here. Since my time at Selby, I've worked with 8 students ranging from high school to master's level, and 7 of those 8 have been women. So I think, you know, having that experience, and where I am in my position, if someone wants to go to graduate school, I know what's required of that. And so I want to do things that I know will be really beneficial for them and help them to be more competitive, you know, in their applications in the future. So that includes, you know, working with me in the lab, generating data, and writing publications. So I hope to have some of those coming out very soon.
Great.
I think the path to encourage young women, not just young women, anyone really, but young women specifically, I think starts at a very young age. I'm a firm believer in how much our children learn from us as grown-ups, and I would implore all grown-ups everywhere to be very aware of how you react to and in the wild, in nature. So when you find a spider in your home, how do you react? Do you kill it immediately because it's awful? Or do you wonder, why is it there? What is its role? Is it eating other insects that I don't want? Does it deserve to die? No, it does not. So you can take that spider and you can put it in a cup and you can let it go outside. And that's just one small example of how our actions affect the young people around us. And I would encourage people to get your children outside, even if it's just in the backyard. But we're very lucky, just in our area specifically, about how much conservation land we have, and I would encourage everyone to use it. And the studies are very clear, the positive effects that being in nature has on our mental state, both as children and as adults. And I think that that early immersion in nature is very powerful. It's very powerful. And as adults, to not have fear, to have questions, ask those questions, and help children ask those questions. So it starts early. Moving forward in time, young women, I think encouraging volunteering, being able to immerse yourself with those who are involved in areas that you might be interested in is very powerful, because you really get to see that day to day, what goes on, what goes into being a botanist in whatever botanical area you might be interested in. And mentoring young women is very important. Just giving them that small opportunity to get that leg up. For example, saying, we're going to go on this field expedition, why don't you be the first collector? I don't have to be. Why don't you do it? You use your collection numbers. And it helps them to get that confidence and to have their name out there, and to build that sort of botanical base if you're a botanical collector.
Thank you both. Those were really great answers to the question of how do you inspire the next generation. So while there's apparently some questions in the Q&A feature. So while I'm doing that, looking for those, and Sally, why don't you tell us about the picture on the left?
Okay, so this was, I thought, a really great photo to kind of document the work that we do, you know, to mentor students at New College. And so in this picture, it's actually both Liz and myself, and then 2 students from New College, both of which have since graduated. But they actually both did their theses. So New College students, when they graduate, they have to do a thesis, and they both did their theses on Tillandsia utriculata. And so this picture was taken at the Fakahatchee Strand, which if you all are in Florida and you have not visited, you should go visit, because it is amazing, very unique area of Florida. And we were doing some active conservation work down there. And so in the past, Selby had gone and collected a bunch of these Tillandsia utriculata. The giant air plant is the common name. The reason they were being collected is because they're being attacked by an invasive weevil. So Selby said, let's go get these plants. This is also in collaboration with Naples Botanical Garden, I should say. So they went and collected these plants, brought them back, treated them to make sure they didn't have the weevil, and put them in the greenhouse so that they could grow to an adult size and flower and set seed. And once they got to that point, we went down and used a very scientific leaf blower method to disperse the seeds up into the canopy to help with natural recruitment in the Fakahatchee. So.
Great, thank you. Thank you. And Liz, you want to tell us about the picture on the right?
Oh, well, this is a project that Selby is partnering with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Bok Tower Gardens, and Manatee County to do some research on the endangered Harrisia aboriginum cactus. And this is a project that Sally and then also our colleague Sean McCourt are leading. And as part of that research project, Selby Gardens will be growing up some of these cacti to be put back out into the wild. And this is a site in Manatee County where they are doing an experimental outplanting to try to determine the kinds of substrate that the cacti would like to live in, the light conditions they need, the appropriate size and age of the plants before they're planted out. And also, as you can see, the cages that are the things laying on the ground are going to become cages to prevent herbivory on a subset of the plants. And so this is the Selby crew that went to work in partnership with Manatee County Parks and Recreation staff as well. And so this, the short guy is my son. And so this is kind of speaking to inspiring that next generation. And I've definitely, as I said, advocate for early immersion of youngsters into the field. And so this also speaks to my work-life balance as well.
Thanks, Liz. I noticed a couple thumbs up there as well.
Always a thumbs up.
Always a thumbs up. We're getting a couple more questions here in the Q&A. I'm just going to ask a couple of them out loud. One of the volunteers said, when can we go on expeditions again? So I just want to make mention to those of you who are tuning in. We have a very active and robust volunteer program here at Selby Gardens. We're obviously not doing a lot of group field work right now, but we'll get back to that one of these days. And if you are interested in volunteering at the gardens, we have lots of different opportunities. So definitely reach out to us. Karen Olson asked if there's any difficulty in bringing plants back to the US. That's a really great question. Let's see, Sally, you want to take that one?
Sure. So we like to be on the up and up here at Selby Gardens. So that means that everything that we collect from the field is done with the proper documentation. So, especially international trips, it can be really difficult to obtain all of the necessary permits. So you need a collecting permit to even get the plants in the field. You need an export permit to take them out of the country. You need an import permit to bring them into the country. And then everything has to be checked out. And so that's usually a USDA facility that checks things out. And that's, for herbarium specimens, so dead plants. Live plants are even more complicated because you have to make sure that you treat them, because we don't want to bring any invasive species or diseases back into the country. So they have to be treated with some kind of, insecticide, fungicide, whatever. And then there's a phytosanitary permit that the country also has to grant you. So everything just has to be inspected. And I think that's, for the best. I appreciate that process, but it definitely is difficult at times, and something that you absolutely have to plan ahead for.
Thank you. Okay, we just have, I think, 2 more video clips, and then we will kind of wrap up our program. So I'm going to move on to the next 2, the final 2.
And another thing, moving forward in time just a little bit more, is the support for the work-family balance. That is, I think, one of the biggest drivers that drives women maybe out of the field of science, even just for a short period of time. I personally experienced this when my son was born. My hours were very, very long. And while I loved my job dearly, I left my job for about 3 years until my son was old enough to start going to school, and then I restarted my career. And it wasn't that my employer wasn't supportive, my job just didn't really allow for it. But as employers, whether it's a university or a research institution like Selby, is to be supportive of that balance so that women are not excluded from field trips, whether it's just a one-day trip or a multi-week trip. Even though this affects men and women both, it seems to disproportionately affect women. And another thing, moving forward in time just a little bit more, is the support for the work-family balance. That is, I think, one of the biggest drivers that drives women maybe out of the field of science, even just for a short period of time. I personally experienced this when my son was born. My hours were very, very long, and while I'm
not sure why that played a second time, but we're going to move on to
It's important. We have to say it twice.
Yes, it is very important. Some very good points, Liz. And Sally, this clip is a little different in nature. This is about the end goal of her research, and I thought it was kind of a nice way to wrap up our program today.
So I have to say that my research, the end goal of my research really is conservation. And I know that some of my answers to the questions beforehand seem a little bit abstract, but really that is the entirety of my research and really what I'm passionate about as an individual. So in terms of the genetic information, with the cactus, the local cactus that we're studying in particular, I can use that genetic information to then inform restoration activities. So for plants to do really well, they're just like humans. You need genetic diversity. Having a lot of inbreeding is really negative for them. So if you have a population that's just all one genotype, that's not good. So for us to do restoration activities, promoting this genetic diversity is really important for their long-term success. And with respect to some of the elevational gradient research I was talking about earlier, that's really important because those plants that are at the very highest elevation, at the tops of those mountains, they have nowhere to go. So once the temperature increases and the climate's changing, they're shoved off the top of that mountain. So knowing that information can really be beneficial and informative for land managers and people that want to actively mitigate some of that and conserve those species in the field.
Thank you. So we have a little bit of time for some more discussion. If anybody has more questions, not seeing more. Lots of people are saying thank you. Will definitely enhance my visit. We really appreciate that. And yes, we hope it was an inspirational program, and we hope that it definitely inspires new and more females to enter the field of science, and more people to come to the gardens and appreciate the collections and kind of what it takes to bring them back here. You know, this is a research-based institution, and we're really proud of that. And you know, it's our colleagues in botany and horticulture that really help make all that happen. Have one more question for you, Sally, that just came in. What's a genotype?
A genotype. All right. So that's basically just the genetic underpinnings of an individual. So Jeannie, you're a genotype. Liz, you're a genotype. I'm a genotype, right? So the crazy thing about plants in particular is that, you know, a lot of them can reproduce asexually. So you can have multiple individuals that are the same genotype. And then, you know, that's just kind of a term that we throw around in the molecular world to describe the genetic diversity and genetic underpinnings of populations and individuals, essentially. And it's critical to understand for conservation research.
Great, great. Okay, Sally and Liz, you have any last things you want to share?
I saw that there was a question about websites or job boards specific to horticulture and botany. So I would also like to plug the Botanical Society of America, specifically for botany, and they do have a job page on there. So I think they list all kinds of stuff from, you know, internships to whatever. Yeah, so that's a good place to look.
Great. And that reminds me, there was one question earlier, way earlier in the program. Someone asked if either of you feel pigeonholed in your career choices. And I wondered if you could speak to that.
I think that was a interesting question. So I wasn't sure if it was like pigeonholed in the sense of like, only being able to work in botanical gardens, like I think that would be an easy transition. But I also think that I could personally transition into an academic position, you know, being a faculty member somewhere. And I think there's like a lot of tools that I have experience with and know how to do that actually kind of apply to a broad range of things. So like this picture in the lab, right? Like it's kind of timely because, you know, I'm setting up what's called a PCR, polymerase chain reaction. And these are some of the things that were actually being used right now by the medical field to really study COVID. And to test people for COVID. And so it's that kind of stuff that all kind of like revolves around together. So I think that's really interesting and cool.
And for me, I work a lot with the preserved collections as well. So that gives me a lot of experience with sort of that museum or collection side of things, not just the field work. But you know, my previous career was in sort of ecological botany, working with the Florida Park Service in land management related work. And so I feel like that's applicable almost anywhere in the world, really, to be able to have that experience with the relationship between plant presence and absence, and how that speaks to the condition of the ecology of an area or the health of an environment. So yeah, I think there's a lot of, like Sally was saying, a lot of broad application for the things that we do. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And Liz, tell us about this picture on the right.
Oh, well, there's a kind of a common joke about following botanists. It's not unusual to see nothing but like the backside of them as they're bending down looking at things. And so that is a picture of myself and our colleague Anastasia Salin. We were using hand lenses. I know it's kind of hard to see them. We were using hand lenses to look at this fern. Sally, you can appreciate that. And this was also in Belize. And so it's, you know, a hand lens is definitely a critical tool for the botanist in the field to be able to see those little tiny characteristics that are very interesting and can often differentiate one species from another. And so that's us doing our botanical nerd thing right there. Good time.
It's great. You know, having traveled with botanists in the field and being married to a photographer, it's a very similar pace, I always say. It's a lot of stopping and looking and stopping and looking.
Yes, you will not take a speedy field trip with a botanist.
No. We have a question here. Will we be working with Spanish Point? And I can answer that question pretty briefly. Absolutely. And enthusiastically, we're really, really excited to have that beautiful 30-acre campus of coastal native Florida, flora and fauna both. It's a wonderful site, and we'll definitely be doing a lot more work down there. It's, of course, also being coastal. It's a unique set of habitats, and so we can do some very interesting projects there. Okay, I have just yeah, I know. Yeah, actually, you should see they're like kids in a candy store down there walking around, looking at all the plant life. It's wonderful. And I just wanted to show you real quick, for those of you who are members and you received the Sanctuary, which is our members newsletter, there was a lovely display here. Sally, I hope you sent this to your parents. But this is a wonderful spread about Sally and her chosen career path. So you can read more there. And up next, we have 3 more Orchid Show related botanical and historical briefings that we hope you'll tune in for. So the first one is with Dr. David Berry, who's my co-curator for this exhibition, and he'll be doing one on November 4th from 12 to 1. That's free and open to everyone. So I would encourage you to share that broadly with people. The following 2 are for members and donors only, just like this one was. And this is about Bertha Palmer's garden on November 18th with John McCarthy, our colleague down at Spanish Point. And on December 9th, Olivia Breda, who's our contemporary botanical illustrator, will be giving a talk on that. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and we really appreciate you tuning in and all of your great questions and engagement. And Liz and Sally, thank you so much for sharing your enthusiasm and all of your talent.
Thanks, everybody.
It was fun. Thank you all. It's easy to share enthusiasm when you love what you do. So
yeah, we're very lucky.
Thumbs up. And a recording of this will be sent out to everyone who RSVP'd. So look for that and then feel free to share that broadly. Thank you all so much. Take care.